There was a robbery, right? Kayla was shot. And in the state's theory of the case, that equals felony murder. But there's a problem with that. So if there wasn't, why would I be here? Why would I be standing before you right now? The problem is that the law says the state must prove that Thomas Stein intended for this to occur.
Objection to the statement of the law.
Ooh.
There are four main lies told by Christopher Horne. One, who the shooter was. The shooter was this guy, Jaden. This is just a made-up name I picked out of a hat. The shooter is Thomas Stein, right? In order to save his bacon, that's what he's saying. Another lie. What'd I do with a gun? I emptied it over here. No, I put it in the canal. Even in jail, he's telling everyone, no, I got rid of it in the canal. The police searched that canal. There's nothing there. What'd I do with my phone? Oh, I chucked it over the side railing of the bridge. It's sitting in the Caloosahatchee River. Well, guess what? The police looked for that gun, for that phone, and it's not there. And the biggest lie he's told is that there's only two people involved that night. Right? You know, and the state keeps making the situation even weirder. It's just a couple of kids out, committing robberies. Or on the other hand, there might have been two other people involved if you look at the evidence. Of the four people that got out of the car that night, only three had the intent to commit a robbery. Two people were arrested for that crime, but there's still two more people out there. And I'm guessing Miss Miller at the end of this, right, she gets to give a rebuttal, is going to say something along the lines of, it doesn't matter if you believe there's two or four, as long as Thomas Stein and Christopher Horne are involved. It's felony murder. And we're going to talk about why that matters. Because at the end of the day, there's only one person on trial today. That's Thomas Stein. At the start of this case, the state makes all these promises to you in their opening statement, right? Do you remember? I asked you to write them down if you could. Because they have to keep those promises to you. And they said...
Objection to the statement of the law.
Ooh.
They said that they knew exactly who the shooter was and they could be identified. The state has served you 13 different witnesses. 13. Right? Let's pretend it's like we're sitting down for this fancy dinner. 13 different witnesses. 13-dish main course. Some, like Luann Dejai, very straightforward, right? Her testimony has been unchanging. She is a victim in this case. Absolutely, 100% agree with you. It's important to remember that sympathy is human, right? To have sympathy for someone, it's human. The empathy that we feel is normal, but we can't let it dictate what the verdict in this case is going to be. You guys in particular were selected, right, during that jury selection process for a very particular reason. Common sense. We thought you had the best common sense. We thought you could read people the best, right? Because we've established this is not a truth-telling box. You're only going to have, from the time it takes to walk from those doors to this stand, to size them up. That's all you got. Lastly, you were chosen because you have the intestinal fortitude, right? to stick to your guns, to deliberate this out. That if there's something wrong with this dish the state is serving you, you're going to send it back to the kitchen. The verdict in this case must be unanimous. That means you all must agree. Everyone here. Did the state prove the burden beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt? Right? And here's the question. That Thomas Stein knew about the plan to rob Kayla, to rob Luann, to rob Emma, that he intended for it to take place and took part in the robbery. It's quite the opposite. And again, reasonable doubt, right? We talked about reasonable doubt during the voir dire. Whenever the words reasonable doubt are used, you must consider the following. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, a speculative, imaginary forced doubt. Such a doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. But on the other hand, if, after carefully considering, comparing and weighing all the evidence, there is not an abiding conviction of guilt, or if having a conviction, it is one which is not stable, but one which wavers and vacillates, the charge is not proved beyond every reasonable doubt, and you must find the defendant not guilty because the doubt is reasonable. You know, the state's talked about this principles theory, and I'd like to go over that jury instruction also. There's two things the state has to prove to you, right? If the defendant helped another person or persons commit or attempt to commit a crime, the defendant is a principal and must be treated as if he had done all the things the other person or persons did if the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Here we go. 1. The defendant intended the crime to occur. Good stop. Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Did they give you any evidence that he intended for this to occur? Testimony of one man, Christopher Horne. And the defendant did some act or said something that was intended to and that did incite, cause, encourage, assist, or advise the other person or persons to actually commit or attempt to commit the crime. But there's a bottom portion of that instruction, and it reads like this. Mere knowledge that the underlying attempted robberies are being committed and mere presence at the scene is not sufficient to establish that Thomas Stein is a principal to felony murder. You know, we talked about this a bit in voir dire. When Mr. O'Brien, who was sitting over here, he's from, I think it was Boston. You know, he's talking about the star athlete that had his whole life in front of him. And he was with those kids that went in and held up the store clerk. And now he's serving life. In Florida, it's a bit different. The state must show that there was intent for that crime to have occurred. Right? You can't just sit there. It's got to be more than that. You know, there's going to be a whole litany of charges that are read because the state says, well, if we can't get them on the felony murder count, maybe they'll come to an agreement as to second-degree murder. No, not going to agree to that. We'll go with manslaughter.
It's in this statement of the law. It's mandatory.
Oh.
They can ask for lessers, in this case, that they have. But after each lesser, you're going to have the same instruction on principles, right? And you're going to have the same instruction as to independent act. If you find the crime of attempted robbery was committed, an issue in this case is whether the crime of attempted robbery was an independent act of a person other than Thomas Stein, an independent act occurs when a person other than Thomas Stein commits or attempts to commit a crime which Thomas Stein did not intend to occur, in which Thomas Stein did not participate, and which was outside of and not a reasonably foreseeable consequence of the common design or unlawful act as contemplated by Thomas Stein. If you find the underlying crime of attempted robbery was an independent act of another person, then you should find Thomas Stein not guilty of the crime of attempted robbery. And here's the thing. If you find him not guilty of the crime of attempted robbery, you must find him not guilty of felony murder. That's what we call an interlocking charge. Okay. So let's talk about the testimony that we received. And I'm gonna break them down in chunks with the exception of one. Detective Law&Crime, I'm going to kind of save the last because he was the lead detective kind of putting everything together. So in terms of law enforcement, our investigation witnesses, we have Officer Vega. He's first on scene, and he did his best to render aid to Kayla. But what do we know from his testimony? There are 4 or 5 subjects. He's fresh on the scene. We know there's 4 or 5 subjects. Gray SUV, going that way. One was a white male, 3 black males. Sergeant, gun. He failed to collect DNA from the hospital when he was on scene. And that's okay. We're doing okay. But why else call him? But for the simple fact to recount the very emotional moment Kayla's parents found out that she had passed. As heartbreaking as this account was, once again, we can't let sympathy guide us on our verdict. Next, we heard from Lansky, who is a retired CSI specialist. Of all the things that was found on the scene, of all the things that she didn't swap, thank God there was one thing she did, and that was the purse strap that was being held by Kayla Rincon-Miller. The purse strap that was being struggled over by her and her assailant. We know that Christopher Horne was excluded as a contributor. We know that there was a partial DNA profile developed, male contributor. But we also know that that male contributor is not Thomas Stein. So we know that there's at least 3 people, right? And if you believe the witness accounts, there's definitely 4. We heard from Officer Alan Precy. He got the license plate reader, kind of gave you the big break in the case, tracking the SUV. We heard from Destiny Robidoux, which is so close to Robidoux. Destiny Robidoux says that she was able to plot the map points, right, of the GPS from Hertz. We were able to plot the cell phone tower records from both Thomas Stein and Christopher Horne and his mom and Jaden Fernandez. We heard from Amy Schober, who is an employee at the Cape Coral Police Department. She's the CSI specialist, right? And I kind of fit this into the category of chunk sentence. Am I crazy, or did she really say she photoshopped some evidence to see if it matched? It was made to fit. And that's the overarching theme of this case. Did she test any other weapon, including the 1911 that we know was on scene, right? Well, no. I just tested what Detective Lalandra told me to test. She considers herself a forensic scientist. That's not how scientists behave. We heard from Detective Scarlato. He introduces this this video with Christopher Horne, right? He's waving around this 1911 with the laser and the pistol grip. Terrible music, right? And the state is trying to make this connection. Oh, but listen to the lyrics. The lyrics themselves give you the plot. It doesn't. I heard this phrase, demon seed? What does that even mean? Detective Scarlato, he corrects Emma Wright's testimony, who said, I know that the shooter was not the driver. And we know the driver was this guy. We know that there's more than two people, according to his testimony. And that the shooter, in fact, was in all black and a red hoodie. We heard from Detective Noelle Hernandez that we don't know what the caliber of the murder weapon was. Glock 27 is a .40 caliber weapon. 1911 is a .45. We don't know what it is. It was a through and through, right? So that means at least the majority of the bullet, we would think, passed through her remains. But we don't know if there were fragments that were still there. She didn't know if fragments were still there. She couldn't tell us. She wasn't the ME who did the original examination. In terms of non-law enforcement witnesses, we have Jessica Stein. She's a single mom of 8. She has 4 kids living with her at home. And we put this picture of her home before you to consider. She tells us how she was threatened by the Horne family. Listen, it's very clear Thomas is going to be arrested, but I need you to keep my son's name out of his mouth. They even offered to pay for his lawyer. Not me. We heard that Christopher Horne Sr., Chris's dad, who's got some knowledge of criminality, says this is how you dispose of evidence. We heard from Jaden Fernandez, and now we're getting closer to the event. He's known Thomas for 2 years. They met at school. Just some neighborhood kids doing neighborhood things. And I don't know if you saw Thomas watch his friend testify against him, but he couldn't help but feel sad that but for this event, I could be going off to college. I could be playing ball.
Sustained.
You know, but he's got this strange category of friends, right? We have Jaden Fernandez, who just spent the day with him and his family going to the beach. Very wholesome. You know, very teenage boy. Going up to girls, chatting them up. We asked Jaden, did Thomas have any ops? And for us older folks, ops means opponents or people that you have beef with. His face kind of screwed up. Thomas didn't have beef with anyone. And Thomas definitely never said, I want to rob a Chico. Or I want to catch a body. And these are 2 statements that Christopher Horne said. You know, Detective LaSalandra, he told us how the car stopped. And we know from the GPS records from Ms. Rabadou that it was for 7 minutes. The car stopped in a church parking lot, like they were meeting someone that's in there. The car parks next to him. We know this because the pastor was kind of see what was going on over there, right? We didn't hear from the pastor, though.
Objection. Overt violation.
Sustained.
I'd ask to strike the comment by counsel.
I'm sorry?
I'd ask that the jurors disregard the remark by counsel.
I sustain the objection. Move on.
Detective Lesalandra confirms there are more than 2 people, right, that he's investigating. He confirms that the DNA found in the purse strap excludes Thomas Stein. He confirms that the investigation is still open. He says that based upon his investigation, there were 4 people, 2 guns. Not even the state's main investigator believes Christopher Horne Jr. Let's talk about the victims in this case. The victims are consistent with one thing. They said that there's 4 shooters. One, the most obvious, was a white male, right? We know this because he slowed down to 5 miles an hour as he passed him, and he's checking him out, his arms in the window. They could see that he has blonde hair, and he's looking at them so hard, and they're looking at him so good, they can tell he's got blue eyes. Another male that they saw was a black male in a red shirt, loud writing across the front. He's in shorts, and he's got a mask on. A third male, heavy-set, black male, red hoodie, blue pants, who we can only assume is Christopher Horne Jr., wearing a mask. Finally, we have a black male with short twists, the t-shirt covering his face, and all black. We can only assume that this person is JD. But when I asked her about the 4 people at the scene, she makes this comment to us. She thought, I was talking to Emma, and we thought to ourselves, am I crazy? Am I crazy? Luann, what do you mean by questioning your own sanity? Why would you do that? Maybe we didn't see the things we thought we saw. We're talking about perception. Who told you there's only 2 people? The state did. Because that fits that square peg into that hole. But she said, I need to tell the testimony that I saw. I'm going to tell the truth. And she did. Let's talk about Val. Am I right? Still 4 people, right? Still the same descriptions. Her testimony last week was inconsistent with every single time she had given testimony previously. Every single time that she talked to the officer on the scene. She talked to detectives later on. She talked to me in a deposition a year and a half later. She was 100% certain, her words, not mine. The driver was not the shooter. The driver was not the shooter. That Thomas ran in front of her to the 2 people, to Kayla and the person, her assailant, that were struggling. Who we think at this point is JD. And a shot rang out. Why would she change her testimony? She said she didn't talk to anyone about her testimony prior to taking the stand. Right? And then I sat down. Then Miss Wolf gets up. Oh, Miss Wright, come on, you remember. You and I had that conversation, right? We had that conversation. And upon your reflection, after these years, upon your reflection, the shooter is now the driver. Why would she claim that? When she walked through those doors, and she stood here, held up her hand, swore to tell the truth, she looked over at this table. She recognized a person that was there. She lost her friend, and she wants justice, and I don't blame her for that. Someone should pay. But here's the thing. Justice doesn't cut corners. And the right people should pay for this. And even though we don't have a burden to do so, the defense put on the case. And we made mention in the opening statement of the state's star witness, right? This co-defendant that was there. This testifying co-defendant, this flipping co-defendant, this rat, whatever you want to call him, right? He was bought at a high price. They bought this testimony at a high price. They cut him a deal of a lifetime. At his age, he will be out still in his 30s. If, big if, he's not caught lying on the stand. The state star witness wasn't called by the state in their case in chief. Why? He's got too many lies. He can't keep it all straight. His account's all over the place. Once again, there aren't 4 people getting out of the car. There's just 2. There's just 2. Jaden's the shooter. No, Thomas is the shooter. Where's my gun? Where's my phone? Sends police onto this wild goose chase. He gives one proffer, right, to the state after his arrest. They're like, you're lying. Try again. He does. He does give him a second proffer. But now it's made to fit. There's still only 2. Gets to keep his deal, protect Trey and JD. But if Sarah, right, because that's how they know each other, you're Chris and you know me as Sarah, right? If Sarah catches him in a lie, the deal is done. It's gone. He's got life. No takebacks. So worst case scenario, this guy can't hold it together on the stand, and we catch him in a lie, he goes away for life. But it gives us a chance to take a bite at Thomas Stein. It's a gamble by the state. But I put him on the stand. Because I could have just sat down and said nothing. You would have heard for neither of the defendants. Because in Florida, life means life. That's what Christopher Horne is looking at. He goes into a box, and after he's dead, he's carried out of the box. And do you remember his testimony, how random it was? Yeah, we saw a guy. We saw a dude over by the ATM. You were watching the ATM? Yeah. It was a guy in a yellow Mustang. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, how'd you see the ATM? I thought you were watching it. He's all over the place. Detective Les Landra tells him this. During one of his proffers, it's like, you know these new cars, these newfangled cars? They are so highly technologically equipped, I can tell when the doors are opened. And that's when Christopher Horne says, oh, well, you see, when I was running back towards the car, I was so confused as to where I was sitting, I opened the back door first, closed it, and then opened the front door and got in. That's not a thing. Law enforcement are allowed to lie to people when they're talking to them about their statements. But this kid took it hook, line, and sinker. We talked about that timeline, right? He is arrested. His mom and his dad and his aunt are arrested for witness tampering. He gives a proffer. He gives a second proffer. The charges against his family are dropped. And now he's here testifying before you folks. You refer to Thomas Stein as sweet. I'm like, can you tell me what that means? He's like, you know what it means. Did he send you candy? No. Mail you a Christmas card? No. That means Thomas Stein is sweet, which is meaning Thomas Stein will do what I tell him to do. I can go to his house, smoke his cartridges, smoke his weed. He can give me a ride, drive me around. He'll do what I want him to do. Within reason. Right? Let's go try doors. Let's go see if some doors are open, some cars. We'll see if we can steal some change, see if we can find something of value. That's the plan. Why do we need Christopher Horne? Why does the state need Christopher Horne to testify? Because there has to be one iota of a plan that was formulated between the two co-defendants and the other two boys that later got in the car. They have to answer, did Thomas know a robbery was about to go down? They have to answer that question. And the defense having no burden, put it in front of you. So next we heard from Thomas Stein. And I'll have to admit, right? He's on trial he's in the trial of his lifetime right now. He's got everything to lose in this case. But still, even with that grain of salt, he's more credible than Christopher Horne. His story makes more sense based upon the forensic evidence. I exposed Thomas to the cross-examination of Miss Wolfe, right? Knowing that she would get to question him. Because that in this case, in particular, you have to hear it from the horse's mouth. And the advice was, you have to be truthful about everything. The ugly truth, yeah, he sells weed through telegraph. He even charges his friends, right? Because he buys the weed, he sells it for the same price, right? And he gets to keep the piece for himself. He didn't have to, but he still had to testify how he got rid of the gun. Because you, as the jury, would want to know why and how it happened. This is based upon the advice of Horne Sr. He admits to hanging out with Christopher Horne Jr. He advises that the plan was to try door handles, so they start driving around. What do kids do on a Friday night or on a Sunday night at the start of spring break. Everything's closed. What are you going to do? You drive around. You just drive around. There's a gun in the car because Christopher Horne likes to pretend they're hard. But the tenor, right? The atmosphere in that car changes when these two guys got in at that church at North Fort Myers. They're just driving around. And you heard Thomas say it felt awkward, like I didn't really belong there. Like these three guys knew each other, but not me. So let's look at this. What indicia, what facts indicate Stein knew the plan to rob these girls? Because that's the ultimate question that we have to answer. If he knew about the plan, then he's involved in the robbery. He's involved in the robbery. He's guilty of felony murder. But if he doesn't know about the plan to rob, and he's not involved in the attempted robbery, then he's not guilty of felony murder. So Tom and these three guys, they're driving down the street, and they see three pretty girls walking. And they're going to do what other teenage boys do. They slow down. They check them out. Thomas, in his gullibility and his stupidity, right? This is the plan, to rob them. In his stupidity, he's just looking at them, right? Staring at them. What's up, ladies? They're giggling at him. He's not wearing a mask. These other boys are in the shadows. He's got a cell phone on him, right? Obviously, if you're going to go and commit crimes, you should have your cell phone on you. He goes live on Instagram that night. What's up, Kalina? What's good, JJ? He hears JD say, hey, I think I know one of them. Turn around. So he turns around. He flashes his lights at him. Hey, over here. I want to talk to you. He stops the car in front of him. And the doors burst open. He opens his door too. Like, what's going on? People are pulling down ski masks, running up with guns, and he's standing there. What's happening right now? He sees the struggle between Kayla and her assailant, JD. He's not claiming to be a hero, but he just wants to separate them because there's a struggle going on. A gunshot rings off. This is consistent with the true testimony of Emma Wright, who testified that she saw Thomas run from the driver's side in front of her, in front of the vehicle, to Kayla and her assailant. This is my last chance that I have to have a word with you. The state gets to get up here and try to rebut everything that I'm telling you now. But I need you to keep this in mind. Is there a reasonable doubt that Thomas Stein, in this case, didn't know that a robbery was going down? Based upon what we absolutely know to be true. That he slowed down, showed his face, not wearing a mask, had his phone with him, stood at the door, tried to intercede. Is this the case where Thomas Stein was actually involved in the planning of this robbery, which resulted in a murder? Or is this like Mr. O'Brien's case, where star athlete was just the wrong place with the wrong people? The judge will tell you that mere presence is not enough. Once again, again, Ms. Miller gets a chance to get up here, and she may say it doesn't matter, it's 2 or 4. But it does matter. Because he was definitely there, and he was definitely driving. There was definitely a robbery. The question is, did he know? And at this point, we have conflicts in the evidence between Christopher Horne's testimony, which is highly questionable. Even taking Thomas's testimony out of it, just look at the facts. Just look at the facts. Once again, justice demands that you find a just verdict in this case that's held in place by the evidence and the law that supports it. The right people have to answer for this tragedy.